weekly conversation where we try to unjumble an important and sometimes under-the-radar statewide story that affects you, and we are live. We have a very full and exciting show planned, but before we start by bringing out our guests, I wanted to talk to my two favorite co-hosts, Zach and Alethia, as the Capitol reporters on this stage right now. How's it going? Are you guys staying hydrated? Are you getting enough sleep?
I went to the peanut shop today and caved into major sugar needs. It was just, enough was enough. Couldn't take it anymore. 3 weeks to go. Can't wait to get through it.
3 weeks to go and probably 40 presidential campaign visits to go. So we're tired, but we're hanging in there.
That is life in a swing state, baby. So what has been, in your guys' opinions, the most challenging thing about covering this year's election as a Michigan news agency?
You want to take that first?
Well, as I think we all know here, Michigan is firmly in the battleground state position. So I think that's the biggest challenge, is just covering all of these races from so many different angles, so many different ads, sending reporters to many, many events. It's exciting, it's great that we're getting so much attention, but I could live with a few fewer events.
I think it's the uncertainty is really different. The last few cycles, the certainty might have been wrong, like 2016. This year, it's just the whole way through, it's just been, I don't know where things are at, what's gonna happen, this could be really close. The voting mechanisms are different. It used to be able to say like, well, there were this many absentee ballots cast in the previous election, and now we have this many, and we could draw comparisons. You can't do that anymore because the rules have changed from election to election. So that's been what I've had a hard time grappling with. Are
you guys still happy that you chose Michigan as your political home base?
I think I'm contractually obligated to say yes.
All right, well, let's bring out our guests. Our first is Andrea Bitely. She's an award-winning political and communications strategist. I got lots to say about her. She has worked in places like the Michigan Attorney General's Office, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and Trescott-Rossman. She now has her own firm, Bitely Communications, and a regular column in the Detroit Free Press. And full disclosure, she's also one of my best friends, Andrea Bitely. And we also have Josh Hovey, also, who I first knew as the marijuana quote guy because he was the communications director for the very successful 2018 campaign to legalize recreational cannabis in Michigan. He has also been a vice president at Trescott-Rossman and is currently a partner at Martin Waymire. And another full disclosure, his wife photographed mine and my husband's wedding. Lansing is the smallest town, y'all. Josh Hovey.
If you want to talk about small town, we went to high school together, Andrea and I.
There you go.
Oh my gosh.
Literally the smallest town.
Well, I want to tee up the presidential race discussion because I think everything tends to flow from the presidential race on down. And one thing that has really struck me, and it's probably true of a lot of races this year, is how the messaging couldn't be more different depending on who's doing the talking. If it's Trump, and you could probably say, and to get into the U.S. Senate as well, but if it's Trump, it tends to be inflation, immigration, culture wars, going after Biden's record. If it's Vice President Harris, tends to be, I'm a middle-class person, Trump doesn't care about you, abortion. Andrea, could you just start off with what do you make of these just totally different issues instead of saying, well, the economy this or the economy that, or foreign relations this, foreign relations that?
There's a real effort to target specific groups that those candidates want to get out and vote. I personally have been so heavily inundated with abortion messaging from both sides that I'm at the point where I'm almost angrily voting about that issue. Today, I counted for Cheyna.
Thank you.
I received 9 emails from candidates about abortion, and I received 2 text messages about abortion. And then it was directed to the Bitely family. So my husband, Adam, who is here, is also the recipient of this particular mailer. But we received a mailer that said, vote for this candidate, otherwise abortion will become illegal again in Michigan. So the inundation of that particular topic is to drive women voters. It's to drive women between 18 and 40, and then again in an older generation because their fear of their daughters being unable to receive reproductive care. So that particular issue is just overwhelming to most women. Now, because I have a former Republican husband who's now kind of changed his stripes, we received some interesting mail at our home. And we've gotten everything under the sun. And he gets slightly different mail than I do. His mail is a little more angry at Republicans. Mine might be a little more favorable towards Republicans. But it's been really interesting to see everything that comes in the mail for us.
And Josh, what about that? I mean, if you're a voter and you're getting these diametrically opposite messages, like both of your communications professionals, what's the thinking there? Why are they doing it this way?
Well, I mean, it is about segmenting out that very small portion of the electorate that can be motivated right now. I mean, people are voting right now. There's something like 10% of ballots have already been cast in the state. And so, especially in an election like this year, where margins are expected to be razor thin, every little bit has to count, and you have to be incredibly well targeted and know who you're going to peel off, who you can convince. And I mean, at the end of the day, probably tens of thousands or millions of dollars are being wasted just because there's not that many people that truly can be motivated to change their mind right now. But you have to count on doing every last thing you can as a campaign to find those voters and get them to push in your direction.
Yeah, we're talking about like 2% maybe of voters, maybe.
Yeah.
The number of people in this room might be deciding some counties and some state house races. We are in I think to quote the governor, the swingiest of the swing states, and it's not going to stop until the evening of election day.
Let's hope it stops.
I mean, I'm not willing to think that mail won't come in the day after the election. I mean, I'm pretty sure it'll be for the few days after the election.
So when we talk about, abortion as an issue for voters, do you think, is this still a topical issue? Republicans are arguing this is decided in Michigan. Democrats are, kind of lying about this issue. It's not on the ballot. Andrea, we can start with you. Do you think, how motivating is it?
Well, it must be motivating enough that all of the campaigns are using abortion as a wedge issue. It is, in one way, a really good fundraising issue, just to get down to the nuts and bolts of it. People will give money to a candidate who is on their side of the abortion issue. So it's a good fundraising tactic. And there are people who are single issue voters, either pro-choice or pro-life. Either way, there are people that are only concerned with that issue. But to be really frank, I want to know more about what these candidates are saying. I have a uterus, and she's lovely, but I also have a brain and a pocketbook, and I drive a car on our roads. I want to know what else candidates have to say about the world around us.
But speaking as a man, I feel like I'm mansplaining on this, and so I'm going to be careful about what I say. But having spoken to the women in my life, this is a deeply, deeply personal issue that can be life or death. And I mean, there is reasonable reason to believe that these voters who have, or these candidates have a track record to show that they might not be genuine in their desire to protect abortion.
But can you tell me right now where Kamala Harris stands? Yes. Can you tell me where Donald Trump stands? Yes.
Can you?
Well, okay,
can
fair
you
enough.
Fair
enough. I can tell you.
If you can tell me how he stands, that's pretty impressive.
I cannot. But I can tell you, if we look at our congressional race, I can tell you where Curtis Hertel stands, and I can tell you where Tom Barrett stands. But in that race, I am inundated also with abortion-related messaging. And we all know Tom Barrett is pro-life and Curtis Rattel is pro-choice. There's no question to me there. But we're still seeing ads on that issue, which tells me they're either speaking to the extremely low information voter, entirely possible, or this is an issue that they are using as a wedge and a fundraising tactic.
Yeah,
I am extremely jaded at this point in the election cycle, I will fully admit.
Well, I think that's where this election, for pretty much every tight campaign, is going to be a turnout model election. And so those low information voters are the ones that most candidates are speaking to right now. And that's where, they don't know the details. They don't know and frankly, they don't care about policy. One of my favorite quotes is that it's a fool who looks for logic in the chambers of the human heart, Coen brothers. And this is not a logic election. This is a vibes election. This is a election based on emotion, and abortion is an emotional issue.
It's an incredibly emotional issue. I fully agreed. I just want to know more. Let's go deeper, is what I'm asking, Josh.
We're all policy wonks here, and I'd love that, but you're asking for a lot.
Well, before we move on to some of those other races besides, the big one at the very top, I'm curious about the sort of big unknown this year, which is Republican voters who do not love Trump, who may have...
just looking at me.
Just got you locked in there. So voters who may have voted for Biden in 2020, maybe they want to go to Harris, maybe they don't. I mean, what are we seeing from these sort of like broken off Republicans, the jaded
We're
Republicans?
voting for Harris.
Is that
That's
your sense?
what's happening. Most of the disaffected Republicans I know have made the logical choice to vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. There's a few that I've had conversations with after a column I wrote in the Detroit Free Press where they reached out and said, I just can't bring myself to vote for her, so I'm just going to leave the ballot empty.
That was my other question. Are they going to sit out?
And I've continued to talk with some of these folks about the importance of democracy and how voting for Harris is voting to continue democracy, and a vote for Trump is voting for January 6th. I personally am not comfortable with voting for another January 6th, so therefore I am voting for Kamala Harris. And I like to think that many of my other, I don't even want to call myself a former Republican, but not a Trump Republicans are going to make the decision, maybe it's a private decision once they get into that ballot booth, that they'll vote for Kamala Harris.
So then let me follow that up with a question for Josh, which is, are Democrats doing enough messaging that is anti-Trump? And what I mean by that is I like Andrea have gotten, a lot of mailers that are about abortion and sort of like this general fear of like this right or that right being taken away. Are they doing enough to be like, hey, this guy, you don't want him?
So I'm actually shocked that for those who watched the Democratic National Convention, there was about I don't know how long it was, but it was a pretty lengthy segment where they just basically did a video showing the horrors of January 6th. How that is not a campaign ad that we're all seeing constantly is really a shock to me, because to relive that moment was horrifying. And there's really no question that Trump was embracing everything that happened that day. Whether he was smart enough to truly plan every little bit of it, we can debate, but the people who supported him were. And how that issue is not being broadcast on every single ad, I'm really surprised by that, because it's a major issue for especially disaffected Republicans. For a lot of them, it's probably their number one issue.
It is honestly, it is my number one issue. Again, I go back to getting all this mail and this contact on the abortion issue. That's fine, whatever. I know that's a very privileged position to say, but I want to be talking about January 6th. I want to be talking about the threat to democracy. Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger have both been really active in this space. Liz Cheney will be in Detroit next week. It's going to be a really interesting day in Detroit. You have Liz Cheney at the Detroit Economic Club for lunch, and then you have Barack Obama in the evening in Detroit. So good luck to Detroit Police Department, wishing them the best that day. But there's not enough conversation, and there hasn't been enough conversation about the threat to democracy that a second Trump presidency
Let me pose this question, though. So let's say you're a traditionally Republican voter from like Rochester Hills or Walker, one of these sort of like well-to-do suburbs that has a really high educational attainment, and you gritted your teeth and you voted for Biden 4 years ago because you just couldn't abide by it. And he was like, Joe Biden's sort of a centrist Democrat and sort of a hawk. I think I could be okay with this. Then you see, 4 years of like pretty high spending, various tax policies and other things that are probably not your cup of tea. Social policy, probably not your cup of tea. And now here you are, 4 years later, you have Vice President Harris, who's to the left of Biden. Can they really, at that point, do you think, plunk for Harris over Trump, or just would it be more comfortable to sit it out?
I think we definitely have a sit it out problem, and that is one reason that I'm hoping that the Harris campaign and all of the different surrogate and 527 organizations get engaged on the democracy issue and on the rule of law issues that really are at the heart of where so many traditional Republicans are. I mean, George W. Bush hasn't been out campaigning for Trump. He's done a whole lot for Republican Senate and Republican House candidates across the country. He has not shown up for Trump.
So let's pivot it over to the U.S. Senate race, because we've got a real barn burner here, it seems, which, we've had a few of these lately in Michigan. It's sort of unusual in that Democrats have won 15 of the last 16 U.S. Senate races in Michigan, but a lot of those are really long ago in a different political time, and the last two have been pretty competitive. So Mike Rogers, Alyssa Slotkin, what do you see happening in that race right now? Is it as close as it seems, Josh, or is it maybe that Democratic advantage still pretty solid?
I think Slotkin has been ahead, but it's clearly tightening from everything we can tell, just not just from polls, but just the way things feel on the ground and what we're seeing on the airwaves and things like that. I think Rogers has struck a chord with some of the EV and China attacks, and that's probably a big factor. And you can see that with Slotkin having to defend her record on those issues lately, and really in all of the non-presidential tight campaign races in Michigan right now, it seems like China and EVs are one of the core issues that we're seeing across the board.
Andrea, where do you think each side has missed opportunities? Where do you think they're doing well in their messaging in the Slotkin-Rogers race?
I think Slotkin has an advantage in that she is an everyman type candidate, every woman type candidate, if you will. She comes across as very approachable, easy to talk to, whether she's on your television or your YouTube channel or in person. Rogers has come across as a little stiffer, and he has changed a lot of his previous positions, which is a little confusing to folks who knew him back in the prior to Trump years. I think where Slotkin has missed is she has not necessarily spent time in certain communities. I'd like to see her getting out more. Rogers also has missed out on a lot of opportunities to be present and be visible.
It's not in Lansing.
He is not in Lansing. Yeah, we have not seen much of Mike Rogers in Lansing. He did a whole UP swing, which, I mean, as somebody who's a big fan of the Upper Peninsula, like, good on him. That's where I like to spend a summer in Michigan. But also, and again, I say this as a UP lover, there's nobody that lives there. Like, like we all go to the UP for a reason. It's pretty vacant, which is a pretty big waste of a Michigan summer to spend in the UP if you're a candidate for the U.S. Senate. Should have been in Rochester, meeting those college-educated folks down in Rochester or in Walker. Should have been spending time in places where he could have changed some mind, maybe kissed a few babies. Slotkin, we've seen way more. She also has a really great social media presence. We saw her Thelma and Louise routine with Debbie Stabenow, which was a pretty great series. It was really cute. many of us have discussed that we do not tell Stabenow or Slotkin how that movie ends. But the reality is being visible as a candidate is huge. I mean, in 2020, we all experienced like the Zoom campaign, which was pretty meh. But now we are inundated with candidate visits, multiples in a day. And I'd like to see all the candidates more, kind of. The presidential campaigns can go away, bring on more Senate race candidate time.
So we kind of touched a little bit on like general spending. Like a lot of money is being spent at every level on this election. $150 million spent on this before it's all done with the U.S. Senate race. From your guys' experience, should they stop throwing money at this? Like, is it diminishing returns at this point? I mean, people have seen
as consultants, no. As the general public, please stop spending money.
Because it seems like at some point, maybe you want to like put the pocketbook away. Like people have the ads. Maybe spend that money more on, like you're saying, like actual visits to places.
I think for both candidates, ground game is going to be what is the most important. So they need to find those voters who are, not your typical voter, your infrequent voter, your low education voter. They need to spend as much as they can finding them and bringing them to the polls. These general broadcast ads and things like that, they're not changing people's mind at this point for the most part. Whoever wins is just going to turn out their people more.
And to do this really quickly, because I do want to get to our questions. So let's hit that 7th congressional district right here where we are. I think, Andrea, you mentioned Curtis Hertel Jr. and Tom Barrett. Anything different about this race, or is it just sort of a cookie cutter of national messages?
It feels very cookie cutter to me. And that's nothing against these two campaigns. I mean, they're using these issues because they poll well, they focus group well. They are the issues that are the issues of the day they're talking about. We are getting into the super silly season where there's a little bit of mudslinging, like a lot of mudslinging at this point, actually. But we're not really seeing anything in what has been considered the most competitive race in the country. Yeah. We're not seeing anything that they're not seeing in any other swing state district.
I do want to ask you this, Josh. So the one thing it's kind of amusing is the biographical stuff that's going on here. So Tom Barrett, he's military guy. He's in a helicopter for one of his ads, and then Hertel responds with the regular guy wearing an apron that says regular guy, drinking a beer.
Yep.
For those of you who are listening, I'm holding up a beer right now. A beer that says regular brew. What do you make of that? Is that effective or hokey or what?
I think they're both kind of hokey. I mean, yes, Barrett is a helicopter pilot. I think he overplays that a little too much. It looks cool when you're flying a helicopter and all that, but
he also had the ad where it was him and his wife and their kids and
he tried the regular guy
minivan.
ad.
That was
clearly didn't work for him because that didn't last very long.
No.
Well, I think he did that in the last race too. And as a pregnant person, I cannot do this, but I think a fun game to play with Tom Barrett's ads would be to take a drink every time you see him in a helicopter or wearing the helicopter gear. Do you think, are these candidates out there enough? I mean, I feel like in Lansing, I'm not necessarily seeing them like,
we're not really a battleground. We're not a battleground for them. The fight is being waged in Livingston and in Eaton County. I mean, we here in beautiful city of Lansing, they expect us to just go blue. They don't care. It's not that they don't care about us, but they really don't want to spend their time and their treasure on people who they assume are going to vote Democrat.
Yeah. One thing I'll note about the mudslinging and everything is I do think Hertel has been hurt by the liberal lobbyist tag, and probably he would rethink taking that job with the governor's office as her lobbyist if he could go back in time, because that's the one thing I think that he's getting hit on that's having some sticking power.
And that's such a Lansing thing too. Like that message wouldn't work in like the 1st district. That message really only works right on here in Lansing.
He didn't work for a multi-client firm. He wasn't lobbying.
We do love our multi-client firms. There are some here tonight. We appreciate you.
We do. But he wasn't lobbying for like the oil and gas industry or things like that. He was a staffer for the governor. But that label is sticking a little bit. And so, I think if he had a time machine, he'd probably rethink that job.
Yeah. So one of our audience questions that we have here, which is pretty salient for the 7th district, is explain the Goshen and the NDA issue. Does anyone want to take it?
Oh boy.
Josh, that's all
We
you.
have a
That's
walk
all
in the
you,
house.
Josh.
I love this.
To me, it's like China is the Red Scare issue of our day, and China taking like auto jobs and cheap Chinese manufacturing, threatening the auto industry, and that is the whether it's realistic or not or anything like that. Just the word China in an ad is enough to get people to sit up and pay attention, and that is that we're seeing that in the Senate, we're seeing that in congressional. It's the bogeyman of the 2024 election.
Yeah, Shanghai Slackin' was, I believe, the hashtag the other night during the debate. Anything you can do to tie someone to China is a winning issue, whether you like it or not. Right now, that is a total boogeyman in this election.
Yeah, I mean, Slotkin's saying how she's going to strengthen manufacturing and prevent jobs and business from going to China. The Republicans are attacking the Dems for allowing Chinese-owned plants in Michigan. So it's going both ways, and we'll see.
And they keep explaining, which, as we all know who are in PR, if you're explaining, you're losing. Right. And every time Slotkin's campaign says, "Oh, but she didn't sign an agreement with the Chinese. She signs it with the Michigan Economic Development." Okay, no, guys.
Move on.
Just. You answer the question you want, not the question you're asked. You don't have to actually say anything about this NDA. You can say this was to better opportunity for Michigan employees and employers to grow our economy. You don't have to say anything about signing something with the MEDC.
I'm curious on that EV topic because Slotkin had this ad where she says, "I live on a dirt road and I'm never gonna make you drive an EV." And I think it was Mike Murphy, longtime national political person, called it like the worst ad of the cycle for the U.S. Senate. And it was a pretty defensive ad, and it did make me think, man, this might be leaving a mark. But what did both of you make of that?
Spot on. I mean, if you're defending, you're losing. You gotta attack. You gotta keep moving your message forward.
And you can plug in an EV at home. Like there's literal tax credits to get a charger. Like, come on, Alyssa, let's do better. Let's get your EV messaging in a better place.
While we still have two communications specialists, I'm curious what candidate, and it can be in any race, anywhere, which one do you think has like the best social media game? Like who is really like on it, is probably going to be attracting the 18 to 40-year-olds at the
I mean, Mike Duggan today had a real banger of a video. I don't know if anybody else caught it. It's pretty cool. Mike Duggan walked around Detroit and copied the New York Times talking about how cool Detroit is. That was pretty cool. Shout out to the new City of Detroit social media team.
For me, I think Tim Walz has done just a great job of being that everyman and like really the antithesis of the Republican candidates, where he is like, he embraces just being a Minnesotan through and through. He's a hunter. He's a football coach. He's a former teacher. He embraces it, and it comes across as genuine on his social media. The other one I was going to mention, and he's not a candidate, but Pete Buttigieg is just the best communicator in politics. He nails every interview. He's articulate, and he doesn't talk down to people. He's got a bright future for whatever he wants to do.
For what it's worth, I totally back Josh up on future potential governor, Senate, state house, whatever Pete Buttigieg does next in life. Great social media game. We
have a couple of sports-related questions. I think we're targeted at me, but we like to have fun on MichMash, so we'll go ahead with one of these here. What are some similarities between political campaigns and ice hockey? Let's go Wings. I know if it said the Penguins, Jordan Hermany would be kicked out of UrbanBeat for saying that. So that's a fun one. hockey tends to be. There's a certain level of sportsmanship or sportswomanship that I don't know exists in the political campaigns these days. That would be a difference. But thank you for that question. And the other sports question was, did the Cleveland Guardians deserve to make the American League Championship Series? And the answer to that is no.
Do Andrea and Josh have any questions for us?
I didn't sign up for that.
Oh, wait a minute.
That's not on the script.
Wait a minute.
Who's been the most responsive to media this cycle?
Good question.
Oh, that's a good one for you guys.
I want to say no one.
Okay, fair.
As an editor, I get a lot of messages from my reporters talking about how much of a hard time they're having getting a hold of candidates.
We had Slotkin and Rogers were scheduled to do interviews with one of our reporters, and they both canceled like back to back, like within. It was like, how did they know this was happening? And
They talked.
It's very challenging.
It was a conspiracy.
It's people are much more skittish. I put in one of my weekend columns recently. There's a lot of no comment-itis going around. That I think the idea that we've always taken great pride in doing these lengthy interviews and getting into the issues with the candidates. I think a lot of these strategists are saying there's no upside in you as a candidate in doing that, and there's a trail left, and it could show up in something offhand you say as a candidate for the state house could show up down the road when you're running for U.S. Senate. I think that's what's going on, but it's unfortunate.
Yeah,
Unless you're a Hot Wings or call her daddy, apparently.
Great ways to talk to new, potentially low propensity voters, right, Josh?
That's right.
All right, give it up for Andrea and Josh. That's it for us this week. This was our first live show, so a huge yes. A huge thank you for Hernz Laguerre Jr. This show is never possible without him. Claps for Hernz. Also Tristan McCauley, who has also come all the way from Detroit to be with us today.
And we also can't forget our news director, Jerome Vaughn of WDET. He keeps the trains running on time and is 100% a mensch. And as we say often in the credits, mixing, mastering, and music by Sam Beaubien.
And please consider subscribing or getting a free trial to Gongwer News Service, or of course you can download our free elections app. Thank you all. Thank you to our guests.
Thank you to UrbanBeat.
And thank you to UrbanBeat. I forgot.
UrbanBeat. Yes, a beautiful venue. Use your code MichMash.